Every year for the past 15 Christmases, I, Elena Vasquez, a 52-year-old office manager scraping by in suburban Chicago, turned my modest two-bedroom house into a makeshift winter wonderland without ever uttering a single complaint. Footing the entire bill for the towering evergreen that scraped the ceiling, the succulent turkey that fed a dozen relatives, and the endless array of side dishes from mashed potatoes swimming in gravy to cranberry relish that I stirred from scratch while juggling work deadlines and my daughter Sophia's college tuition payments, because deep down I believed that's what family meant, sacrificing quietly to keep the traditions alive amid the chaos of everyday life. Even as the credit card bills loomed like shadows in the corner of the living room once the guests had departed with their full bellies and vague promises to reciprocate next time. This particular December, with the wind howling off Lake Michigan and frost etching patterns on my windows, I found myself once again elbow-deep in preparations, hauling boxes of twinkling lights from the garage where they'd gathered dust since last year, stringing them along the mantel with fingers numb from the chill. All while my mind wandered to the upcoming office holiday party where my boss would likely pat me on the back for organizing the spreadsheets, but forget to mention my name in the thank yous, a pattern as predictable as the snowfalls that blanketed the streets. Sophia, my 24-year-old daughter home from her graphic design program in Boston, pitched in with her usual enthusiasm, chattering about her latest projects as we unpacked ornaments that held memories of simpler times. Like the year her father left us for good, forcing me to step up as both parent and provider without missing a beat in the holiday cheer. Though inwardly I often wondered if anyone noticed the toll it took on my sleep-deprived nights or the way I'd skip lunches to save a few dollars for the feast. Work at the accounting firm dragged on that week, a monotonous blur of balancing ledgers for clients who treated tax season like a personal vendetta, and during a particularly tedious staff meeting where Mr. Hargrove droned on about year-end projections, I slipped my phone from my purse under the table, intending to check Sophia's flight status since she was due in soon, only to accidentally swipe into an old family group chat I'd muted ages ago after it devolved into nothing but forwarded chain emails and complaints about gas prices. The messages dated back to early spring, starting innocently enough with plans for Mother's Day brunch that I, of course, had hosted at my place complete with fresh flowers and a cake from the bakery down the street, but then they shifted into something sharper. Marco, my older brother with his perpetual get-rich-quick schemes, typing out a snide remark about how I always turned holidays into guilt trips by making a big show of the preparations, followed by Carla, my younger sister who worked as a real estate agent in the city and never failed to arrive fashionably late, replying with agreement and coining the phrase that sliced through me like a jagged icicle, Elena's the holiday parasite, sucking the joy out of everything by expecting us to show up empty-handed while she plays the martyr card for sympathy. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared at the screen, the fluorescent office lights suddenly too harsh, the words blurring slightly because they couldn't possibly be real. Not from the same people who'd crashed on my couch after midnight mass without so much as offering to wash a dish. The ones I'd covered for when Marco's car broke down en route to Thanksgiving or when Carla's kids needed last-minute gifts that magically appeared under my tree. That label, holiday parasite, echoed in my head throughout the rest of the meeting, a bitter undercurrent to Hargrove's praise for the team's invisible efforts, which felt all too familiar, like I was the perpetual background player in my own life. Always contributing the heavy lifting, whether at the firm where I managed the chaos without fanfare or at home where I'd transformed ordinary gatherings into festive spectacles year after year, dipping into savings I'd earmarked for emergencies just to ensure the nieces and nephews had something to unwrap besides disappointment. By the time I clocked out and drove through the slushy streets toward home, the initial shock had curdled into a slow-burning anger mixed with a reluctant amusement at the sheer audacity of it all, because if anyone was parasitizing, wasn't it them? The ones who reaped the benefits of my labor without a second thought, like the time 2 years back when Marco's business tanked and I quietly paid his share of the family vacation deposit to keep the peace? Laughter bubbled up unexpectedly as I gripped the steering wheel, a dry, humorless chuckle at the irony of being called a freeloader when my bank statements told a different story, one of overdrafts and skipped vacations, all in service of that elusive family bond that now seemed as fragile as the glass bulbs dangling from my eaves. The next morning brought our annual pre-Christmas lunch at the local diner, a no-frills spot with vinyl booths and a menu that hadn't changed since the 80s, where Marco had insisted we meet to hash out logistics for the big day. Arriving 20 minutes late as usual with his rumpled suit and that salesman smile that could charm a miser out of a dime, Carla trailing behind with her latest boyfriend, a quiet type who nodded along to everything without contributing a word. We settled into a corner booth, the air heavy with the scent of frying bacon and artificial pine from the holiday decorations taped to the windows, and ordered the usual, club sandwiches for me and Marco. A salad for Carla, who was always watching her figure, and the conversation flowed in that superficial way families do, touching on work woes like my endless overtime at the firm and Marco's vague tales of networking events that sounded more like excuses for bar tabs, while I steered clear of the chat discovery, opting instead to observe, noting how Carla's eyes darted to her phone every few minutes and how Marco dominated the Czech conversation by joking that I always picked up the tab to keep things festive. A comment that drew chuckles from the others, but landed in my gut like a poorly aimed snowball, heavy and cold, confirming the casual cruelty behind those digital words. As the meal wrapped up and I slid my credit card across the Formica table without protest, a plan began to form in the recesses of my mind, something subtle yet pointed, like rerouting their annual gift exchange list. The one I meticulously organized each year with budgets and suggestions to include items far beyond their willingness to contribute. Or perhaps anonymously pledging donations in their names to local causes that would ding their reputations just enough to make them pause, a witty retaliation that mirrored their stinginess without descending into outright confrontation, because storming outright then would only give them the satisfaction of drama, and I wasn't about to hand over that victory on a silver platter. Pulling into my driveway later that afternoon, the house lights flickering on automatically against the encroaching dusk, I sat in the car for a long moment, phone clutched in my hand as the weight of the day's revelations settled over me like a threadbare blanket, leaving me to ponder just how deep this betrayal ran and whether confronting it head-on would mend the fractures or shatter everything irreparably, especially with Sophia's arrival imminent and the promise of holiday warmth hanging in the balance. Yet that nagging question refused to fade. What if this was only the tip of the iceberg, and peeling back the layers revealed something even more devastating lurking beneath the surface of our so-called unbreakable family ties? After that revealing lunch at the diner where Marco's offhand joke about me always footing the bill had twisted the knife a little deeper into the wound opened by the group chat discovery, I spent the next couple of days wrestling with the urge to either explode in a confrontation that would ripple through the family like a dropped ornament or to bide my time and let the simmering resentment guide me toward a more calculated response, all while preparing for Sophia's arrival from Boston, her flight landing amid a flurry of texts about airport delays caused by the relentless Midwest snow that turned runways into skating rinks, and as I cleared the guest room of old boxes filled with holiday decorations and childhood mementos, I couldn't help but reflect on how I'd always positioned myself as the steady anchor in our fractured family dynamic, hosting gatherings that masked the underlying tensions without ever demanding acknowledgement for the emotional and financial labor involved. Even though each year the costs chipped away at my modest savings like persistent waves eroding a shoreline. Sophia burst through the door that evening with her duffel bag slung over one shoulder and a burst of energy that immediately lightened the atmosphere, wrapping me in a hug that smelled of airplane coffee and her favorite vanilla lotion. Launching into animated stories about her semester abroad in a design workshop where she'd created digital illustrations inspired by Urban Decay, and we settled into the kitchen with mugs of herbal tea, the steam curling up as she helped unpack groceries for the upcoming pre-Christmas gathering, her perceptive eyes catching the shadows under mine and prompting gentle questions about whether the family drama was flaring up again. To which I responded with a forced smile and a vague assurance that it was just the usual holiday hustle, though inwardly the dilemma gnawed at me, wondering if confiding in her would burden her young shoulders or empower her. To see the hypocrisy I'd overlooked for so long. The pre-Christmas gathering unfolded the following weekend in my living room, transformed once more into a cozy festive haven. With the scent of roasting chestnuts mingling with the sharp tang of pine from the 8-foot tree I'd wrestled into place single-handedly after work, its branches heavy with ornaments that told stories of better years, like the hand-painted ones Sophia made in elementary school, or the crystal star from our last family vacation before Dad's departure left us navigating holidays on our own, and relatives began arriving in waves. Marco first with his obligatory 6-pack of beer clutched like a peace offering despite my repeated hints about cutting back on alcohol-fueled toasts, followed by Carla, who swept in fashionably late with her boyfriend Tim, a mild-mannered accountant who carried a lopsided store-bought pie that looked as though it had survived a minor earthquake on the drive over. And soon the space filled with overlapping voices discussing everything from neighborhood gossip to complaints about rising heating bills, while I moved seamlessly between the kitchen and the gathering, replenishing platters of homemade appetizers like deviled eggs garnished with paprika and cheese straws baked from a family recipe passed down from Mom, all the while injecting casual observations designed to probe their consciences without revealing my hand, such as casually mentioning to Marco over a refill of his drink how I'd covered the entire catering bill last year after his business hiccup left him short, phrasing it as a fond memory to see if guilt would flicker across his features, and sure enough, he shifted uncomfortably, mumbling something about tough times while avoiding eye contact, a subtle crack in his facade that fueled my quiet resolve to continue the game of subtle revelations. As the evening progressed with laughter echoing off the walls during a round of charades where Tim's awkward attempts at miming holiday classics drew genuine chuckles from even the most jaded aunts, I excused myself to the kitchen for a moment of respite, wiping flour from my hands on a dish towel embroidered with snowflakes, only for Sophia to follow me in with her tablet tucked under her arm, her expression a mix of concern and quiet fury as she whispered that she'd accidentally accessed the old group chat through a synced family account on her device, confirming every hurtful word and adding layers to the betrayal by showing me earlier exchanges where Carla had vented about feeling overshadowed by my perfect hostess routine, tying it back to unresolved jealousies from our teenage years when Mom had praised my reliability over Carla's more rebellious streak, and the weight of that additional context hit me like an unexpected draft from an open window, forcing me to confront how my efforts to hold the family together might have inadvertently bred resentment rather than gratitude, a realization that left me leaning against the counter for support while Sophia squeezed my arm, her voice fierce as she declared them all ungrateful opportunists who didn't deserve the energy I poured into these events. That intimate exchange in the midst of the party noise provided a momentary anchor, blending the sting of fresh hurt with a spark of solidarity from my daughter, who had always been my greatest ally. But it also amplified the internal conflict raging within me, the pull between maintaining the peace for her sake and unleashing the truth that could fracture our already tenuous bonds, especially as I returned to the living room to find Marco holding court with exaggerated tales of his latest networking triumph, oblivious to the undercurrents swirling around him. Humor edged into my thoughts as I observed Carla's boyfriend fumbling the pie server and sending a dollop of filling splattering onto the area rug, a mishap that required quick dabbing with club soda and sparked a round of light-hearted ribbing about holiday disasters, which served as a perfect distraction while I mentally catalogued their half-hearted contributions, like the single bottle of wine from an uncle who usually brought nothing at all, reinforcing the irony of their Parasite accusation when my preparations often verged on professional catering levels funded from my own paycheck, and it was during the casual gift exchange brainstorming session around the coffee table, with everyone tossing out wish list ideas ranging from spa vouchers for Carla to tech gadgets for Marco's supposed entrepreneurial pursuits, that the opportunity for my first deliberate act of retribution presented itself, as I nodded along to their extravagant suggestions before quietly stepping away to my home office under the pretense of grabbing wrapping paper, where I accessed the shared digital gift list I'd maintained for years and methodically altered the entries, redirecting pledges and budgets to anonymous donations for a local women's shelter in each of their names. Complete with automated confirmations that would alert their inboxes by morning, a clever maneuver that exposed their stinginess without a direct confrontation, turning their expectations of freeloading into a public display of reluctant generosity that would undoubtedly ruffle feathers and prompt questions they couldn't easily dodge. The satisfaction of hitting send washed over me like a warm sip of mulled wine, a witty payback that echoed their pettiness right back at them, yet it carried an undercurrent of unease, making me question if I was stooping to their level or simply reclaiming some measure of balance in a dynamic long skewed against me, particularly as Marco called out from the living room wondering where I'd disappeared to, his tone laced with that familiar entitlement. By the time the guests began dispersing into the crisp night air, cars crunching over the fresh layer of snow on the driveway and farewells exchanged with hugs that felt more obligatory than heartfelt, Sophia pulled me aside near the front door, her breath visible in the cold as she hinted at even older messages in the chat that delved into financial gripes she'd glimpsed but not fully read, urging me to dig deeper before the big Christmas push. But before I could respond, my phone vibrated insistently in my pocket with an incoming text from an unfamiliar number stating simply that we know about the gift list tweak and demanding a family meeting the next day without further explanation, sending a jolt of uncertainty through me as I stared at the screen under the porch light, the house suddenly feeling too exposed and the implications swirling like the flurries starting to fall, leaving me to wonder if this was Sophia's protective intervention gone awry or one of my siblings mounting a counteroffensive, and whether facing it head-on would illuminate the full extent of their deceptions or plunge us all into a holiday abyss from which there was no easy return. That cryptic text from the unknown number lingered like a persistent fog over the subsequent days, casting a pall on what should have been a season of simple joys. As I navigated the escalating demands at the accounting firm where year-end audits piled up like unchecked holiday cards and Mr. Hargrove, my boss with his perpetual air of distracted authority, delegated the grunt work of reconciling discrepancies to me while spotlighting the junior analysts for their innovative insights during team huddles, a dynamic that mirrored the family slights so closely it almost drew a wry smile from me in the midst of the frustration, because if I was the invisible backbone at home, why not at work too? Always the one ensuring the numbers balanced without fanfare or fair compensation, even as whispers of promotions circulated among those who networked louder rather than worked harder, leaving me to ponder during late-night coffee breaks whether my reliability was a virtue or a curse that invited exploitation from all sides. Sophia, sensing the mounting tension in my clipped responses and the way I stared blankly at the computer screen during our evening unwinding sessions, gently coaxed more details out of me about the gift list redirection, her eyes widening with a mix of admiration for the cleverness and concern over potential fallout, and together we delved deeper into the archived group chat messages she'd preserved on her tablet, uncovering threads from over a year prior where Marco boasted about optimizing the joint family account left by Mom after her passing, the one originally intended for shared emergencies like home repairs or educational funds for the grandkids, revealing how he'd siphoned portions for his faltering real estate flips while Carla provided alibis through her industry connections, all under the guise of savvy investments, and the holiday Parasite label emerged not just as petty gossip, but as a deliberate deflection to justify their pilfering, portraying my requests for transparency as greedy overreach when in truth I'd never touched a cent, content to let it sit untouched while I covered holiday extravagances from my own strained budget. The internal tug-of-war intensified with each revelation, as part of me yearned to march into the next family interaction with printed evidence in hand, demanding accountability that could finally redistribute the emotional load I'd carried solo for decades. Yet another part recoiled at the prospect of shattering the fragile holiday facade for Sophia's sake, who still harbored hopes of mending our sibling rifts through open dialogue rather than division, a perspective that made me question my Vengeful inclinations as perhaps too harsh or self-serving, especially when memories surfaced of Mom's gentle admonishments to keep the peace at all costs during her final years, leaving me to weigh the cost of confrontation against the slow erosion of silence, all while the workplace parallel gnawed at me, exemplified by Hargrove pulling me aside after a particularly grueling client call to commend my solid support role in averting a filing error, but then announcing a bonus pool skewed toward the sales team, his words landing like another layer of dismissal that echoed Marco's casual entitlements, fueling a resolve to stop being the perpetual giver without reciprocity, whether in boardrooms or family dining rooms. The so-called family intervention materialized that Thursday evening at a nondescript coffee shop in the city's Loop District, its plate glass windows steamed from the warmth inside, contrasting the biting wind outside, where I arrived 10 minutes early to claim a corner table amid the hum of laptops and murmured conversations, nursing a large latte that burned my tongue as I rehearsed neutral responses in my head, determined to let them reveal their hands first without tipping into outright accusation. And when Marco strode in with his overcoat slung over one arm and Carla close behind twisting her scarf nervously, accompanied unexpectedly by Aunt Rita, our reclusive relative from the suburbs who rarely ventured out for anything less than a funeral, the atmosphere thickened immediately with the undercurrent of premeditation, their seating arrangement forming a semicircle that felt more like an inquisition than reconciliation. The discussion commenced tentatively over steaming mugs and plates of gingerbread cookies that tasted stale despite the festive icing, Marco taking the lead with his rehearsed sincerity about how we've all drifted and needed to rebalance holiday responsibilities to avoid burnout, phrasing it in a way that subtly shifted blame onto my over-the-top hosting as the root of the strain, while Carla nodded vigorously, adding anecdotes about her hectic schedule with open houses and kids. Activities that left little room for elaborate preparations, all of which rang hollow given the evidence of their financial maneuvers. And I interjected with measured humor about past mishaps like the infamous turkey that dried out in '98 due to a power outage, drawing brief chuckles that eased the tension momentarily but did nothing to mask the growing conflict simmering beneath. As Aunt Rita, usually the silent observer, shifted uncomfortably in her seat before leaning forward to drop the bombshell she'd carried for years, confessing in a hushed tone that she'd overheard Carla confiding to a neighbor about feeling perpetually second best to me in Mom's eyes, the resentment festering from adolescent competitions over who got the most praise for household chores, and how that old grudge had fueled the chat's vitriol, tying the Parasite moniker to a deeper narrative of perceived favoritism rather than mere holiday gripes, a disclosure that stunned the table into silence, Carla's cheeks flushing crimson as she stammered partial admissions of exaggeration born from stress, while Marco deflected with talk of moving forward, but the twist reframed everything, illuminating how my steadfast role as the family fixer had unwittingly sown seeds of envy that blossomed into outright sabotage. That pivotal admission hung in the air like unspoken accusations during the remainder of the meeting, where proposals for shared duties devolved into specifics that still leaned heavily on my coordination skills, such as me sourcing the venue while they handled minor contributions, a setup that only heightened the dilemma churning inside me, making my choice to withhold the full financial proof seem almost naive in hindsight, as if preserving unity trumped justice when the evidence screamed otherwise, and viewers might well shake their heads at such restraint, urging a cleaner break from the toxicity. Yet in that moment, surrounded by their feigned remorse, the pull of legacy of not being the one to dismantle what Mom had built held sway, laced with a touch of light vulgarity in my private thoughts about how this whole charade felt like a poke in the ribs with a dull fork, all wrapped in seasonal goodwill. As the gathering concluded with strained handshakes and promises to touch base soon, the revenge impulse sharpened into focus amid the office holiday party invitation burning a hole in my planner, an event where Marco often networked as Hargrove's informal guest, providing the perfect stage for a subtle strike. So I slipped away early from the coffee shop to compose an anonymous email to a key family acquaintance, none other than Hargrove's wife, who volunteered at the same charity board as Aunt Rita, detailing just enough about Marco's account irregularities to spark inquiries without crossing into malice, attaching redacted statements that hinted at the discrepancies and hit send from a throwaway address, the action carrying a thrill of witty retribution that turned their hidden schemes into exposed vulnerabilities. And by the time I arrived at the firm's glitzy venue later that night, decked out in rented ballroom finery with twinkling lights and a jazz band playing seasonal tunes, the whispers had already begun circulating, Marco's schmoozing interrupted by sidelong glances and polite but probing questions from attendees, his composure cracking just enough to satisfy the knot of tension in my chest as I mingled from the periphery, sipping sparkling cider with a concealed sense of triumph that this small unraveling served as poetic justice for years of overlooked contributions. Navigating the crowded dance floor and forced small talk afterward, the party's artificial cheer clashing with the raw undercurrents of my discoveries, I fielded Hargrove's toast to the team's resilience with a nod that masked my growing disillusionment. But as the evening wound down and I stepped out into the crisp air laced with distant carols from street performers, my phone illuminated with a forwarded invitation from Carla for a surprise family dinner scheduled for the night before Christmas Eve, complete with cryptic notes about toasting to fresh starts, sending a fresh wave of uncertainty crashing over me, because while it could signal a genuine thaw in relations prompted by the intervention's truths, the timing felt too convenient, too laced with potential ambush, leaving me to drive home through snow-veiled streets wondering if attending would yield the closure I craved or entangle me further in a web of half-confessions and lingering deceptions that threatened to overshadow the holidays entirely. The invitation to that surprise family dinner arrived like an unsolicited gift wrapped in suspicion, forwarded through Carla's email with flourishes about rekindling the spirit and a venue chosen for its neutral ground status. A cozy Italian bistro in the heart of the city known for its candlelit tables and hearty portions of pasta that could soothe even the most frayed nerves. Yet as I stared at the screen in the quiet of my home office late that night after the office party's fallout, the words blurred under the weight of uncertainty, wondering if this was their attempt at damage control after the anonymous tip stirred up questions about Marco's finances, or perhaps a calculated move to corner me with more half-truths before the holiday peaked. All while Sophia paced the hallway outside, her footsteps soft on the carpet as she debated aloud whether we should skip it altogether in favor of a quiet movie night with takeout from the corner Thai place, a suggestion that tempted me with its simplicity, but clashed against the ingrained habit of showing up to mend fences, even when the fences had long since splintered under the pressure of unspoken resentments and financial betrayals. Days blurred into a tense prelude, filled with workdays where Hargrove's sidelong glances hinted at ripples from the email I'd sent, his casual probe during a coffee run about family troubles in the air, making me wonder if the connections ran deeper than I realized. And at home, Sophia and I pored over the old will documents Aunt Rita had scanned and shared, piecing together clues that Mom's intentions might have included safeguards against exactly the kind of mismanagement Marco had engaged in, her handwritten notes in the margins speaking of protecting the heart of the home, which now felt pointedly aimed at me as the one who'd always kept the hearth burning through sheer willpower and overlooked sacrifices, leaving me to grapple with the dilemma of whether voicing this at the dinner would finally tip the scales toward justice or ignite a conflagration that scorched any remaining ties, a choice that viewers might view as overly cautious, urging a bolder stand against the manipulations, yet rooted in the fear of alienating Sophia from her extended family or unraveling the fragile web of memories that still held us loosely together. Arriving at the bistro on the designated evening, the air crisp with the promise of impending snow and the streets alive with bundled pedestrians rushing toward holiday lights strung across lampposts, I smoothed my wool coat and stepped inside where the aroma of garlic and simmering tomato sauce enveloped me like an old acquaintance, guiding me to the private back room Carla had reserved, its walls adorned with faded photos of Tuscan landscapes that contrasted sharply with the strained expressions on the faces already gathered around the long oak table set with red checkered cloths and flickering votives. Sophia clung to my side, her hand brushing mine for reassurance, as we took our seats opposite Marco, who nursed a glass of Chianti with forced nonchalance, Carla fidgeting with her napkin beside him while cousins and Aunt Rita filled out the ends. The initial exchanges laced with superficial pleasantries about the weather's bite and the latest neighborhood news, but underlying it all thrummed the unresolved tension from the intervention, manifesting in hesitant toasts to enduring bonds that tasted as bitter as oversteeped espresso, and I participated with measured smiles, sharing a light anecdote about a childhood Christmas when Dad attempted to build a gingerbread house that collapsed into a sugary heap, drawing scattered laughs that briefly thawed the ice, but did little to dispel the growing conflict, especially as Marco steered the conversation toward logistics for the main event, proposing scaled-back contributions where everyone pitched in equally, a notion that rang false given the evidence of his solo withdrawals from the family fund, prompting me inwardly to question why I hadn't already laid all cards on the table instead of this diplomatic dance that prolonged the discomfort. As the first course of antipasti arrived, platters of olives, prosciutto, and crusty bread that we picked at more out of habit than hunger, the atmosphere shifted when Aunt Rita, emboldened perhaps by a sip of wine, produced a weathered envelope from her purse, its edges frayed from years tucked away in a drawer, containing a letter penned by Mom in her looping script during her final illness, detailing amendments to the will that allocated a larger portion of the estate to me specifically for maintaining the family home as a gathering place, a provision Marco had quietly influenced the executor to reinterpret after her death by citing tax burdens and his role as primary manager, funneling the bulk toward his ventures while leaving me with vague assurances of equity, and the revelation cascaded through the room like a spilled glass of red, Carla's fork clattering against her plate as she denied foreknowledge with wide-eyed insistence, Marco's jaw tightening into a defensive line. While cousins exchanged shocked murmurs, the twist not only validating the depth of their deceptions, but also resurfacing long-buried jealousies about Mom's perceived favoritism, where my reliability in caring for her during treatments had earned me that trust, turning what I'd seen as duty into a source of their lingering grudge that fueled the Parasite slander as a smokescreen for their guilt. Emotions surged within me, a turbulent mix of vindication and sorrow that made the candle flames dance unnaturally in my vision, amplifying the dilemma as I weighed bursting forth with the full financial proofs right there amid the breadcrumbs and half-eaten charcuterie, or holding back to avoid traumatizing the younger relatives. A restraint that might seem foolish to outsiders craving a dramatic showdown, yet felt necessary to preserve some dignity in the face of their crumbling facades, all underscored by a wry internal humor at how this upscale meal had devolved into a veritable feast of revelations, tasting more like humble pie than homemade marinara. The discussion meandered through dessert, a rich tiramisu that sat heavy in my stomach, with half admissions and deflections, Marco claiming desperation from business setbacks and Carla tearfully recounting pressures from her own household. But the air remained charged, every glance laden with the weight of exposed lies, and as the meal concluded with checks divided unevenly despite their earlier rhetoric, the opportunity for retaliation crystallized in my mind, having prepared earlier that day. A digital slideshow of holiday memories shared via a family cloud link, ostensibly a nostalgic tribute, but carefully curated with interspersed scans of past event receipts bearing only my payments alongside photos of their lavish arrivals, captioned innocently with phrases like, "Teamwork makes the dream work," that highlighted the imbalances without overt accusation. So when the server offered to connect a device to the room's small projector for after-dinner entertainment, I volunteered with feigned enthusiasm, launching the presentation that unfolded across the wall in a montage of twinkling trees and smiling faces interspersed with those subtle indictments. The room falling into an awkward hush as Marco's laughter died mid-chuckle and Carla excused herself abruptly to the restroom, the cousins shifting uncomfortably while Aunt Rita nodded knowingly, the witty sting of the display landing precisely as intended, exposing their ingratitude in a public yet familial forum that left no Room for denial without seeming petty, a satisfying cleverness that echoed their betrayals back through visual irony rather than verbal barbs, yet it stirred a hollow echo in my chest, making me ponder if such measured vengeance healed the wounds or merely cauterized them temporarily. Lingering over final coffees as the group dispersed into the night, coats buttoned against the now steady snowfall and goodnights exchanged with lingering awkwardness, Sophia linked her arm through mine on the walk to the car, praising the slideshow's impact but voicing worry about escalating reprisals, her words resonating with my own uncertainties as we navigated the slick sidewalks illuminated by garland-wrapped streetlights. And just as we reached the vehicle with its windows frosted over, my phone chimed repeatedly with incoming notifications, pulling up an email chain inadvertently forwarded by a cousin's reply-all blunder, revealing Marco's recent correspondence with a real estate agent outlining plans to list the family home. The very one Mom had willed as our shared anchor for a quick sale to cover his debts, dated mere days after the intervention and executed without consultation, the details stark in their finality, from staging suggestions to projected profits split unevenly in his favor, sending a visceral shock through me that tightened my grip on the door handle. The ultimate betrayal unfolding on the eve of Christmas and forcing the precipice decision of whether to confront it immediately in the raw vulnerability of the moment or harness it for a culminating response that would redefine our fractured legacy, once and for all. Christmas Eve morning broke with a relentless gray sky pressing down on the suburban sprawl, the kind of muted light that filtered through my bedroom curtains and cast long shadows across the hardwood floors where scattered wrapping paper from the night before lay like fallen leaves, as I lay awake staring at the ceiling fan's lazy spin. The forwarded email chain about the family home's impending sale replaying in my mind with merciless clarity, Marco's bold signatures on the realtor. Correspondence detailing not just the listing price, but also his calculated division of proceeds that left Sophia and me with mere scraps after his administrative fees. A final gut-wrenching betrayal that transformed the holiday from a time of tentative reconciliation into a stark confrontation with the depths of their self-serving deceptions, all while the scent of fresh coffee brewing downstairs pulled me from the bed. Sophia's voice calling up that breakfast was ready, her intuitive understanding of my turmoil evident in the way she'd set out plates of pancakes drizzled with maple syrup from the local farm stand. A small act of normalcy amid the chaos that made me question yet again if plunging into this final reckoning was worth the potential devastation to her sense of family, or if silence might preserve some illusion of unity. A dilemma that outsiders might decry as lingering weakness after all the revelations, urging instead a swift and unyielding severance from the toxicity that had festered for years under the guise of tradition. The internal conflict churned as we ate in the sunlit kitchen, Sophia probing gently about the dinner's aftermath and whether I'd confront Marco directly, her support unwavering yet tempered with caution about legal entanglements during the holidays. And I shared fragments of the home sale plot, watching her face harden with the same indignation I'd felt upon discovery, but the pull of Mom's legacy of the home she'd envisioned as our enduring gathering place tempered my resolve, laced with a dry humor at the irony of spending Christmas Eve contemplating property deeds instead of trimming the tree, a far cry from the childhood idols I'd tried so hard to recreate. Even as the weight of impending action settled like an uninvited guest at the table. By midday, the house began to hum with preparations for the main family gathering, the one I'd scaled back in scope, but not in emotional stakes. As relatives trickled in through the front door with covered dishes that represented their belated attempts at contribution, Carla's store-bought dinner rolls still warm from the bakery bag, Marco's haphazard fruit salad tossed with canned peaches that spoke to his minimal effort, and the cousins arriving with bottles of sparkling cider that fizzed softly when uncorked, filling the living room with a cacophony of greetings and the crackle of the fireplace I'd lit to ward off the chill seeping through the windows, where the evergreen stood sentinel, its branches adorned with lights that twinkled like hesitant stars against the gathering dusk outside. Conversations swirled in clusters, touching on everything from work promotions to neighborhood holiday light displays, but the undercurrents from the bistro dinner lingered palpably, manifesting in Averted gazes when Marco and I crossed paths in the kitchen, and Carla's overly effusive compliments on the decor that rang false after the slideshow's exposures, and I moved through it all with the poise of a seasoned hostess, refilling glasses and passing trays of glazed ham sliced thin with cranberry relish on the side, injecting lighthearted stories about past Christmases like the year a blizzard trapped us all overnight, leading to impromptu games until dawn, drawing reluctant smiles that briefly masked the tensions but did nothing to erase the growing conflict, especially as Aunt Rita pulled me aside near the mantel to whisper her support for challenging the sale, her eyes sharp with the knowledge of Mom's true intentions, reinforcing that this wasn't just about property, but about reclaiming the equity I'd poured into every brick through years of maintenance and mortgage help while they profited elsewhere. As the afternoon waned into evening with the exchange of gifts under the tree, practical wool scarves and scented candles from me contrasting their more ostentatious offerings like designer handbags for the women and gadgetry for the men, the moment I'd anticipated arrived during the traditional living room toast, glasses raised in a circle amid the warm glow of strung lights and the faint melody of carols playing from the stereo, where Marco cleared his throat to propose a sentiment about moving past old grievances into brighter tomorrows, his words dripping with insincerity given the fresh emails in my pocket, and I stepped forward then, voice steady despite the tremor in my hands, declaring that before we drink a bit of proof was in order to ensure our futures aligned with honesty, connecting my phone to the television with a few swift taps to project the compiled documents, the realtor contracts, bank statements showing diverted funds, and even snippets from the original will, highlighting Mom's directives for equitable shares onto the screen where they glowed in stark detail, Marco's name prominent in the betrayals that unfolded like a poorly wrapped present, the room erupting into a stunned hush broken only by the pop of a log in the fire as Carla gasped audibly and a cousin murmured in disbelief, the revelations cascading through the space and forcing acknowledgments that could no longer be deflected. Chaos bubbled up in waves, Marco sputtering defenses about necessary steps for stability, and Carla dissolving into tears with pleas for understanding amid her own marital strains. But I held the floor, outlining my decision with calm finality. No more hosting these elaborate affairs, no further financial or emotional bailouts from me, and immediate consultation with a lawyer to rectify the home's disposition and account discrepancies, the words carrying the weight of years suppressed, a clever culmination of retribution that mirrored their deceptions. Through transparent exposure rather than rage, satisfying in its wit as their facades crumbled under the holiday lights, yet stirring a complex swirl of emotions where triumph mingled with the sorrow of dismantling what I'd once cherished. Especially as Sophia stood beside me, her hand on my arm a silent affirmation that softened the edges of the confrontation. The fallout unfolded in fragmented arguments and hurried apologies as the evening fractured, relatives excusing themselves early into the swirling snow that had begun to fall in earnest, coats grabbed amid awkward hugs and promises of follow-up calls. That felt as empty as the now-vacant gift pile, Marco lingering last with a defeated slump to his shoulders, muttering about talking it out privately while Carla hovered tear-streaked in the doorway, but I ushered them out firmly, the door clicking shut behind them like a period at the end of a long-overdue sentence, and with the house settling into a profound quiet broken only by the distant hum of plows clearing the streets, Sophia and I cleared the remnants of the feast, boxing leftovers for donation to the local shelter as a nod to the new boundaries I'd set, the act grounding me in a sense of purposeful redirection away from their orbit. Yet as we shared mugs of hot cocoa by the dying embers of the fire, the conversation turning reflective on the day's upheavals, a lingering twist emerged from Aunt Rita's parting whisper about a possible hidden codicil in Mom's will tucked away in a safety deposit box, one that alluded to unforeseen burdens Marco had shouldered alone. Perhaps debts or secrets from her past that explained his desperation without fully excusing it, leaving an ambiguity that hung unresolved, making me wonder if his actions stemmed from inherited shame or unadulterated greed. A question mark that provoked deeper thoughts on forgiveness and the blurred lines between victim and enabler in family legacies. Powering off my phone then, the screen fading to black amid the soft patter of snow against the panes, I felt the weight lift incrementally, embracing the solitude as a gift of reclaimed agency. Pondering whether this severance would invite genuine reform from them or solidify the chasm, and if next December's holidays might sparkle anew in self-crafted peace rather than obligatory pageantry, the uncertainty a thoughtful veil over what lay ahead, inviting reflection on the true cost of giving without boundaries.